I spent some time thinking through all of the schoolyard bullies that I had encountered as a kid growing up, and I decided not to tell you any of the stories because they're too embarrassing. I was on the receiving end of some stuff and on the giving end a time or two. Maybe you've got your story with bullying, being bullied by someone or bullying someone back in the day, or maybe like last week or earlier today. But Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, his title was the Pharaoh. He was really a bully. I mean, he ruled over the country of Egypt, and he bullied God's people, the Israelites. He took things that didn't belong to him. He didn't share. This is, bad playground etiquette. And he hurt people just to get his way. But it was worse than that. We've seen already how the Israelites, they had to work for him. It was forced labor. He trapped people. He made them enslaved. So they had to work for him and no reward. These were God's people. The Bible calls them the children of Israel, reminding us of their vulnerability. And they were young and old, and all of them were subject to this oppression. So I think it's worth taking a moment to enter into our Bible passage with our imagination and just to wonder together, how did the children of Israel feel when they thought about Pharaoh? Did they you bet they talked about Pharaoh at home, but Pharaoh was probably like he who must not be named. You don't even want to think about a guy like that. But if you were an Israelite and somebody said Pharaoh, or you thought about this guy, or you saw him or one of his minions, what might be going through your mind? Not happy thoughts. And Pharaoh thought he could just keep hurting the Israelites. He was building his empire through them, and he thought he could keep making them do whatever they wanted, whatever he wanted to do. What he didn't realize, and this whole book is him realizing this, he didn't realize that God was watching. God was there. God saw everything that Pharaoh did. Pharaoh made the people of Israel cry and weep and despair, but God was listening. Every time they cried, God made these children of Israel just be stuck, but he didn't realize God was about to free them. Let my people go. So we're in Exodus 3, and we'll spend more time in Exodus, this second book of the Bible. I think I mentioned a few weeks ago that Exodus means going out. Like today, when the worship service is over, at some point, we will have an exodus from 419 Shamet Avenue. We will go out from here and go somewhere else. Maybe you'll go back home or to the grocery store or to a friend's house. There will be an exodus from this place. That's what that means. Exodus isn't always a good thing. Sometimes we have to go out of a place that we don't want to go out of. Any of you who, I don't know, have come back recently from vacation may not have wanted to make an exodus from that vacation. You might want to stay there a little longer. Sometimes we have to leave and it's not our choice. Maybe you're having a great time at a dinner party, but it's 10:30 and the dishes are still dirty and you need to leave before you get asked to help. So you make your exodus. And an exodus can be really painful. Like maybe you have to leave an apartment or a house or a neighborhood that you really love. Maybe you've got some great setup in your life and things are changing and you've just got to go. That's an exodus. The story of Exodus is almost an ironic title because nobody's going anywhere at the beginning of this book. There's no going out anywhere in sight. They are stuck. Exodus is not about an exodus at first. First, it's a story about God's people who are trapped. But it's called Exodus, and we see it today because God is going to help them get out. It's going to help them go out of Egypt so that they can get away from this evil bully, this tyrant, Pharaoh. We see God say he will rescue them. He will free them because he loves them. And Exodus is a wonderful story. There's a reason that people of all ages connect with this and have connected with this for thousands of years. It's the story of the good news of God's love. It's the reminder over and over again that God sees you when you're sad. God hears you when you're crying. Sometimes people, you might go into the bathroom and close the door so nobody even in your house hears you crying, and that privacy is great. God hears that. And it's good that he hears that. He knows how you hurt. God knows your pain, it reminds us in Exodus, and God promises to be with you through all of it. So Moses encounters God in a very powerful way in Exodus 3. We'll have some more time next week in Exodus 3. But we get these lovely lines: never looking down, and right there where we stood was holy ground. Actually, that's a Taylor Swift song called Holy Ground. That's not from the Bible, but you can see how influential this is throughout culture. Even Taylor Swift is singing about this passage. Sometimes in my house, Taylor Swift and the Bible start to kind of blend together. We're not really sure which is which. Moses was one of the children of Israel that God rescued. And God was going to use him to rescue all the people of Israel right out of the hands of Pharaoh. Now, if that sounds intimidating to you, it is. And we stopped the passage before where we'll get next week, where Moses says, Lord, I don't think you have the right guy. Here are all the reasons why you should have called somebody else. And I don't know if any of you ever talked to God like that before, but maybe we see ourselves in that. Here he is, Lord, send him. Here she is, Lord, she'd do a better job, take her. So Moses will respond that way, but God's going to be with him. This small baby, Moses, remember we saw him the other week? It almost didn't make it. And now here he is. God is appearing to him as a burning bush. Like just this giant bush on fire that does not burn down. And I don't know if you noticed this on verse 3. Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up. Like, wouldn't you just be running? Like, why did he stop to say that? Like, just run to the bush. It's just kind of funny. Like, oh, I wonder what that is. It's a burning bush. Let's go. He's probably shocked by it. I mean, again, we believe these are historical. They actually happened events. So can imagine, how would you feel if a burning bush just down the street was on fire? You'd probably call the fire department. But God calls from the bush and makes clear this is not something you need to call in to the local authorities. This is me, God. And God's going to name himself as this passage goes on next week. And God said in verse 4, Moses, Moses. And Moses says, here I am. Moses realized that he was in a very special moment, a very pivotal moment in his life. He's 80 years old. It's been a long time. A lot of hurt, a lot of pain. God said, the ground where you are standing is special. It is holy ground. So God talks to Moses from this miraculous burning bush, and then God says, look at verse 7. I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. I would guess that all of us could think of times where we were going through something hard and we felt like nobody saw it. Or maybe you even tried to tell somebody what you're going through, and they listened, they were polite, but they didn't really get it. Because how could they, right? Maybe you feel like nobody cares. And then a moment happens where, whether it's God or another sister or brother in Jesus, somebody sees you and you know it, you feel seen. That's like the best feeling. I had this was some time ago, I was having a rough day, and so just texted Sarah and asked her to pray for me, and she sent me a picture of a fridge full of refreshing beverages, and she said, this is waiting for you when you get home. I felt seen. It's the little things sometimes. You see me, you know that will help. The coffee's already brewing for when you get here. Those little things that we feel seen. But it's such a good moment to have been isolated. And look, Moses is 80 years old. We skipped a lot of time, and we're still only on chapter 3. But just, have you ever prayed for something for a long time and it didn't happen? And then the next day it didn't happen. And then the next week it didn't happen. And then the next year it didn't happen. And maybe right now in this moment, you're on year 23 of praying for the same thing that still hasn't happened. One reason why I think Exodus relates to us so much is it is just these years of ridiculous patience that the people practice in waiting for God. And funny thing, it's years of ridiculous patience that God has to exercise waiting for the people to do the right thing. So God says, he gives us the rest of the book right here. I'm going to save you. I'm going to free you. I have seen you. You are seen. Be seen. I know. I see you. And this just, the passage gives us, I've observed the misery. I have heard their cry. I know their suffering. I mean, it's very specific, like not just I see you, but like I have seen this, and let me name it for you. You didn't know I was watching, but I'm going to describe your experience in such great detail that you know I'm dialed into you. I know their pain and suffering. God sees these people, and that means that God sees you. So God says, I've seen you, so I'm going to come deliver you. I'm going to bring you into a good and wide land. Lots of space, lots of food, everything you could need. I'm going to take you there. Exodus, going out. You're going to go somewhere else. I'm going to take you. I will be with you every step of the way. So God says to Moses, now come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the children of Israel, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And that's where we kind of paused for today. Like I said, we'll look at more of the passage next time. But before we get to that, it's so important for us to remember how God sees us. God sees us. He's right there. And he's going to use Moses. He's going to use Aaron, his brother. He's going to use Miriam. He already used Miriam to save him in the first place, his sister, to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. He's heard their cry. He's going to rescue them. And that's the rest of the story. And it's going to be awesome. Lots of unexpected stuff along the way, like frogs and, the plagues and all the rest. But these stories in Exodus all point to this truth that God loves his children. God sees his people. God hears the cries of his children. And that means when you cry, God hears you and is listening with love. I don't know when the last time you cried was. If it's been a while, sometimes it can feel good to have a good cry. Sometimes crying doesn't feel good. I've heard people talk about that as ugly crying. And you kind of know that if you're in the middle of an ugly cry. It's not someone else calling you ugly. It just feels awful, God sees all of that, and he hears that crying. He's right there. God sees his children when they're hurt. We see this in Exodus, and still today when you are hurt, God sees you, and he knows that pain. He's no stranger to it himself, and he looks at you with love. God frees his children. So it's, the seeing is great. And in that moment of being seen in a difficult situation, that is awesome. But we'd also like to be helped out of the difficult situation. Maybe we want our own exodus from whatever it is that's trapping us in the moment. And God promises that here too. He says, I'm going to bring you out. So that means that when we are feeling stuck and trapped, God is ready to free you. God's ready to free us. Now, we may not see a burning bush like Moses did, but God sees you just like he saw Moses. God sees you, God hears you, God knows you, God has rescued you. He's rescued all of us by coming to earth as a baby, as Jesus, another baby boy that barely survived. And this Jesus now sees you. This Jesus hears you. This Jesus knows you. This Jesus has rescued you and wants to keep rescuing you from everything that might get you stuck, from everyone that might, be a bully like Pharaoh. So it's a very simple message that I just almost mid-story today wanted us to pause and remember that the next time you are hurt, or maybe you don't have to wait for the next time because it's right now. Next time you're hurt, remember, Jesus is right there, seeing you, loving you, holding you close, even weeping with you. Next time you are crying, or the next time you want to cry. Maybe it's worse if you want to cry but can't. You've reached this level of pain and numbness. Jesus is right there with you, listening to you, knowing you, loving you. Next time you're in pain, or next time you're suffering, next time somebody you love is in pain, Jesus is right there, knowing that pain and loving you through it. So I want to take just a moment now to offer some time for us to pray, to lift up to God those things that are trapping us, that maybe those areas, especially where we don't feel seen, we don't feel heard. Let's take some time in prayer now. I'll lead us in a kind of a guided pastoral prayer for our prayer time this morning, and we'll go right into it. But I want to start with just a moment of silence and ask you to call to mind, is there somewhere in your life right now where you're not feeling seen? Let's take just a moment and prayerfully call that to mind. Somewhere in your life where you're not feeling seen, you're feeling misunderstood. And God, I want to lift up each thing that each person called to mind right now for themselves, or maybe it was for somebody else. It is very isolating to not feel seen in our pain. This is one reason why you give us church communities, but we know that we love each other imperfectly, and only you love us perfectly. So I lift up especially, God, anyone feeling unseen right now, unheard, unattended to, and ask for you to make your loving care known to them. Help us to understand you and experience you as the God who sees, the God who has observed our misery. You've heard our cry, whether it's about something enormous or something small. You're the God who knows our sufferings, and you are also the God who has come down to deliver us. So I want to invite you now, just in continued silence and the quiet of our own hearts, just to take a moment to ask God to rescue you from this area in which you feel unseen. Ask God to come deliver you. God, this story reminds us we don't control when or how you intervene. Maybe it would be nice if if we could. At least I know I want to sometimes. That maybe that's the wrong way to think about it. But this burning bush reminds us, while we're just going about our day, you are already waiting to rescue us. And so, God, for people who are still waiting on that vision, who are still waiting on that rescue, who are still waiting on that deliverance, God, come rescue them, I pray. Maybe it's a broken relationship. Maybe it's a besetting sin. Maybe it's an ongoing frustration. Maybe it's a physical health issue. Maybe it's a mental health challenge. God, I pray for you to just reach down your arm and pull us out, just as we see you doing with Moses and the people here.